is widely recognized as the greatest MVP race ever. Larry Bird had a historically great all-around season. Michael Jordan had the greatest scoring season in modern history. And Magic Johnson had the greatest season from a point guard ever. The three most important NBA figures were playing at an all-time level. We're going to discuss the regular season performances from these players. We're going to start with the third place and finish with the MVP winner. Make sure to comment on your take on who was the most deserving. The Larry Bird stock couldn't be higher than the summer of 1986. He went to the finals in 3 straight years and won the title twice. He won the MVP in 3 consecutive seasons, and he was the leader of the greatest team the league had ever witnessed, the 1986 Boston Celtics. After winning his 3rd title, people were wondering out loud if Larry Bird was the best player ever. It was truly a dominant 3-year stretch. But as the 1986-87 season concluded, there was a false narrative that was being pushed around. Magic Johnson echoed some of the storylines surrounding Larry. During his MVP press conference, he said in part, "I'd like to thank Larry Bird for having a slightly off year." Are we sure that's the case? Let's take a look at his numbers from the 2 seasons. As you can see, he averaged more points and assists. He was also more efficient and recorded higher numbers in various advanced metrics. The reality is that he was just as good, if not better, as he was the previous year. What Magic must have been referring to was the way we viewed the Boston Celtics. In the previous season, they were levels above everyone else. In 1987, various injuries to key players brought this team back to earth. Their lack of depth was the story all year long, and they had to rely so much on the starting lineup. The roster was more than enough to win nearly 60 games, but that era of invincibility was now gone. Danny Ainge summarized their struggles when he said this after losing 3 straight late in the season. Quote, "I don't have any answers to what has been happening to us. We're struggling right now. I think we're all concerned about all the injuries that have hit lately. Robert is hurting. Kevin McHale's toe and ankle are bothering him. Dennis Johnson is playing with a bad shoulder, and Bill Walton has not played in 12 games. It's tough to win games that way." End of quote. What he forgot to mention was that Bird also missed 8 games with a strained lower back. Then their coach, K.C. Jones, offered perspective on this grueling season to the Boston Globe. Quote, "I've never seen anything like this before with the injuries. We've had that kind of year. I've seen Larry and Kevin and those guys dragging their legs, but somehow we keep going." End of quote. That's what makes this particular season by Larry Bird so impressive. He was asked to lead the league in minutes after 3 straight seasons of playing in the finals, and he responded by having an extremely efficient scoring season. This was the first time that he averaged over 50% from the field, 40% from the 3, and 90% from the free throw line. The added workload didn't seem to bother him one bit. Instead, he recorded a stat line that's only been accomplished by a handful of players. He is only one of 6 players to average over 28 points, 9 rebounds, and 7 assists per game. That list includes Oscar Robertson, John Havlicek, Russell Westbrook, Luka Doncic, and Nikola Jokic. Bird was able to increase his production out of necessity and allowed the Celtics to have another dominant season. They finished with the best record in the East and the 2nd best overall. However, he wasn't alone. It's important to mention that Kevin McHale had the best season of his career. He was hands down the best power forward in the game. He averaged 26.1 points per game on 60% shooting. He was the first player ever to average over 25 points on at least 60% shooting. He was unstoppable. On top of that, he averaged nearly 10 rebounds and 2.2 blocks per game. He was also one of the top defensive players. This was a big reason why he finished 4th in MVP voting. When your teammate is playing at that level, it's going to hinder your odds of winning the MVP. I believe that played a part in where Larry Bird landed in the MVP race. I'm sure he didn't mind at all sharing the spotlight with his running mate. As great as he was playing, there were times when Larry looked like the best player in the world. There was a game against the Sonics when he had 42 points on 54% shooting, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks. Then there was the game against the New York Knicks when he had 47 points on 65% shooting, 8 assists, 7 rebounds, and 4 steals. After that performance, He mentioned that he doesn't normally like to shoot that much, but it was necessary with how short-handed they were. The numbers never really mattered that much to him. It was all about winning. His team needed him more than ever, and he delivered in a big way. His MVP case was certainly strong. Better than Wilt Chamberlain when he averaged 50 points per game? Better than Kobe Bryant when he scored 81 points in a game and outscored a strong Dallas Mavericks team by himself? That's right. For reasons we're about to discuss, Michael Jordan had the greatest scoring season in NBA history. When did this happen? This was in the 1986-87 season when he averaged 37.1 points per game. Let's first start with a statistical case. He recorded the highest points per game average by any player since the NBA/ABA merger, which occurred in the 1976/77 season. If we account for all of history, it's the 5th highest points per game average. He also racked up the 3rd most total points scored for a single season. He scored a total of 3,041 points. The only other player to score over 3,000 points in a season is Wilt Chamberlain. Then we have this other impressive scoring feat. For most players, scoring over 40 points in a game would be one of the highlights of their season. But for MJ, it was considered a disappointment when he didn't score that much. He was able to score 40 or more points in 37 games. That's nearly half of the season. That is the 3rd most ever, behind only Wilt Chamberlain's 1962 and 1963 seasons. But that's not all. There were also 8 games where he scored 50 points or more. His season high was 61 points, which he did twice against the Atlanta Hawks and the Detroit Pistons. We'll talk more about that game later in this video. Here's another crazy accomplishment that Jordan had this season. Do y'all remember when Kobe Bryant scored 40 or more points in 9 consecutive games in the 2002/03 season? Well, Michael did the same thing. He scored 40 or more points in 9 straight games. After that historic streak, his arms got tired from all that shooting, and he was held to 11 points by the Milwaukee Bucks, which ended the streak. So just for good measure, he had 2 straight 40-point games that could have pushed the streak to 12 games. Speaking of sensational scoring streaks, Jordan also scored 50 or more points in 3 straight games. By the way, the only other player to match or surpass that streak in the modern era is Kobe Bryant. He scored 50 or more in 4 consecutive games in 2007. The numbers do not lie. What he did in that season was nothing short of historic, and we haven't seen anything like it since. But it's not just the numbers that make this season so impressive. Take into consideration the team that he was playing for. The Chicago Bulls were not a talented team by any stretch of the imagination. That was proven in the previous year when Jordan missed all but 64 games due to a broken foot. They had a 30-52 record. But that's not the only thing. Check out the roster from the 1985/86 Chicago Bulls. Take a look at their 4 leading scorers for the season. Their leading scorer was Orlando Woolridge. He was traded to the New Jersey Nets in the offseason for a 2nd-round draft pick. Next up, we have Quinton Dailey. He was their 2nd leading scorer, but he left to play for the Los Angeles Clippers. Their next leading scorer was the legendary George Gervin, but he left to play overseas in Italy. Now we have their 4th leading scorer, Sidney Green. He was also traded away for pieces that would end up being of no use to the Chicago Bulls. So this team that wasn't talented to begin with lost all of their best scorers. Who was called upon to help MJ on the offensive end? It was Charles Oakley, who was only in his 2nd season. That was a team that Michael Jordan was stuck with. I know we like to make fun of how bad the 2006 Lakers were, but this was way worse. If you don't believe me, check out what some of the media members were saying about this team during the season. Roy Johnson of the New York Times called the Bulls talent poor, and that their season will all come down to exhibitions of 1-on-5 basketball. Curry Kirkpatrick of Sports Illustrated wrote that the Bulls were a collection of untested rookies, veteran rejects, and Jordan. He also wrote that if Jordan concentrated on passing to the other Bulls, Chicago might finish 20-62 or 0-82. The Bulls were undeniably the least talented team in the league, and their losing record reflects that. The only way that they could remain competitive was for Michael Jordan to win games by himself. For nearly half the time, that's exactly what he did against professional basketball teams. The opposition knew that the Bulls had no one else that could generate offense. Even with every team putting all their attention on stopping Jordan, he still managed to nearly shoot over 50% from the field. But that's not the only factor that makes his efficiency so impressive. It should also be noted that he was playing high-intensity basketball on both ends of the court. He would make this incredible move at one end and then stop your best perimeter player at the other end. In fact, the numbers suggest that he was arguably the best perimeter defender in the NBA. For example, he averaged 2.9 steals per game, which was second in the league. He finished first among all guards in blocks. He had a 1.5 blocks per game average. In this regard, he made history. He became the first player to have more than 200 steals and 100 blocks in a season. Since then, only Hakeem Olajuwon and Scottie Pippen have been able to accomplish this feat. He also finished 4th in defensive win shares and 7th in defensive box plus minus. He wasn't like other players who only play one side of the floor to save energy. He was doing it all for this team. Take for example his performance against the 76ers when he had 56 points and 8 steals. Or his game against the Cavaliers when he had 43 points, 8 steals, and 5 blocks. But of all of his incredible performances, his favorite one came against the bad boy Pistons. Why is that? This is what he said to Sports Illustrated. Quote, "Because we won, and because I switched onto Adrian Dantley in the last few minutes, stole the ball 3 times, and held him without a basket. A victory for defense." End of quote. This was a game where he finished with 61 points on 56% shooting, 7 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and 3 blocks. And you wonder why they invented the Jordan rules. It's because they had no answer for him. That is why I believe this is the greatest scoring season of all time. It was his aggressive mindset, his artistic expression, and the degree of difficulty of all the points that he scored. He was being held back. He happily took a backseat to the great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and focused on getting others involved. Once he was given the green light, he unleashed a whole other side that the league had never seen. He made history time and time and time again. To this day, Magic's 1986-87 season is still unquestionably the greatest by a point guard. Before we get to that, we must first understand what led him to such a historic season. Let's go back to the 1986 playoffs. The Lakers were looking to defend their title, and they were destined to meet the Boston Celtics for the 3rd straight time in the finals. They had the best record in the Western Conference, and they were facing a young and up-and-coming Houston Rockets team in the conference finals. They had great potential, but they simply didn't have the talent or the experience to beat the Showtime Lakers. That's what the media claimed, but they shocked the world after defeating LA in 5 games. After such a heartbreaking defeat, the Lakers were forced to make some changes. At the time, Kareem was their primary scorer. Magic's job was to get everyone else involved and to score when it was needed. This method helped them win 3 titles. However, Kareem was no longer the same player. He was 39 years old, and it wasn't wise to revolve the offense around a player pushing 40. The biggest offseason change they made didn't involve a trade or a free agent signing. It was a slight but important adjustment to this already explosive offense. Magic Johnson had it all figured out. According to Sports Illustrated, he went to Pat Riley and told him he was going to be scoring much more. He worked on becoming a better outside shooter and post-up player. This was a moment he was waiting for a very long time. The legendary sports writer Bob Ryan once wrote in his column in 1988 that early in Johnson's career, he said to several Lakers beat writers, "You won't see the real Magic show until Kareem retires." The captain wasn't ready to call it quits just yet, but we saw a glimpse of the greatest show on earth. He averaged a stat line that's only been done once in the history of the league. He averaged 23.9 points on 52% shooting, 12.2 assists, 6.3 rebounds, and 1.7 steals per game. He led the league in assists, and he finished 10th in scoring. This is the only time that we've seen a player average over 23 points and 12 assists in a season. When you add his rebounding averages, you could say this is one of the most impressive all-around seasons ever. The improvement that he made in his game was showcased at various times during the year. For example, he had a stat line against the Sacramento Kings that made it seem like LeBron James was out on the floor. He scored his career high of 46 points on 47% shooting, along with 10 rebounds and 9 assists in an overtime victory. There were also 2 other games where he scored over 40 points. Then there was a game where he would make Russell Westbrook blush. Against the Houston Rockets, he had 38 points on 61% shooting, 16 assists, 8 rebounds, and 3 steals. Then of course, there were games where he played like the old Magic, like when he had 20 assists and 11 points in just 28 minutes against the Nuggets. With Johnson playing at his absolute best, the Lakers reached a level of dominance that we've only seen a handful of times. The most noteworthy stat is that they hold the highest offensive rating out of any team of the 20th century. It was 115.6, which is the same as the 2016/17 Golden State Warriors. That is a perfect comparison to how remarkable the Lakers were on offense. The same way we thought the Warriors were unstoppable on the offensive end is how the league viewed this team. Magic deserves most of the credit for that. For example, this is how legendary sports writer Jack McCallum described the Lakers that season for Sports Illustrated. Quote, "Without Magic waving his wand over every X and O in the Laker game plan, the Lakers would be merely above average instead of the top drawer. Rarely has one player done so much for one team in one season." End of quote. When it comes to the greatest season from start to finish, the 1980 season for Magic should absolutely be in the discussion. If we're just talking about point guards, no one comes close to what he accomplished. But what about you all? Do you agree with Magic Johnson winning the MVP? Do you think Larry Bird or Michael Jordan was more deserving? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.